Hello everyone and welcome to today's session, Cross-Disciplinary Collaboration for a Resilient Cyber Ecosystem. I am Shilpa Sharma and I will be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. An important note, admissions are currently open. For further details about our courses, please visit our website www.eccu.edu. Our speaker for today's session, Professor Donald Easton. Donald Easton is currently a professor of cybersecurity at Lane Community College and operates his own consulting business focusing on cybersecurity in the education sector. Donald spent over 20 years in the technology industry, with the last decade focused on cybersecurity, primarily cloud and network security. He is passionate about using his knowledge and experience to help secure organizations. He is also active in the certification field, having written and evaluated exams for vendors, ISC2 and EC Council. He holds the CISSP and CEH certification. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Professor Donald.
Thank you, Shilpa. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're at. After that introduction, let's get started. Just a quick note, this is a very broad topic, so we probably won't get super in-depth into it, but we will cover a lot of ground. So, so first and foremost, what is a cyber ecosystem? So what is an ecosystem? Ecosystem consists of several different interconnected components. It is a complex network. Typically, when we usually refer to an ecosystem, it's often referred to in a biosphere, that type of ecosystem. But for us in the cyber ecosystem, we are concerned with the security of everything within that ecosystem. So that is a network of interconnected systems, technologies, organizations, individuals working together. So it's a conglomeration of folks. Why is this important? It is important because cyber threats are evolving. They're getting bigger and bigger. They're multifaceted. You know, it's not that send a virus through an email thing that we used to see 20 years ago. Nowadays, we're concerned with advanced persistent threats. We have to worry about man-in-the-middle attacks, social engineering, ransomware. We have to worry about internal threats. Internal threats are a big deal now. And so more and more of that is occurring as adversaries are figuring out that that's the easiest way to get into and infiltrate an organization and maintain persistence. Okay. It also is cross-disciplinary. I'm a big fan of I consider cybersecurity interdisciplinary because it's not just technology. So we have to look at policy. We have to look at, sociology is an important piece of that. That's how people think. What are they doing? Why would they want to do this? And how are they going to do it? The economics of it, we have to look at, our ROI, but we also have to look at how long after an incident are we going to be down? What kind of impact are we looking at when we get affected by that incident? What the cost is going to be? Are we going to do it internally? Are we going to respond internally? Or do we have a contract with another corporation or a company to come in and do that mitigation and that bringing us back online? So we have to worry about that too. And that, the sociology piece of this too is also like social engineering. We're all very familiar with that. Social engineering, phishing, this is very, very prominent nowadays. So when we look at the challenges that we have to be mindful of a few different things. One of those is that the complexity of the threat. Okay, malware, we all know what malware is. We know that it's rampant, that there are many different kinds of malware, from viruses and Trojans and rootkits and ransomware. And so we know that there's a big group of this kind of software that we have to really be concerned with. So what we look at is we have to be prepared for everything. The adversary definitely has the advantage in this situation because the adversary is the one that doesn't follow the rules. They don't have to follow the rules, and they can pick and choose whatever target they want to pick. And oftentimes organizations that are targeted aren't aware that they are targeted. So, it's usually a surprise. The best you can do is build up your network defenses and hope for the best. But we need to go beyond that, and we need to look at the complexity of these threats. These threats are becoming more and more intelligent, long-term, and it can include things like advanced persistent threats. Advanced persistent threat, that's exactly what it sounds like. It's made to infiltrate, to infect, to gather data, whatever the intention of the adversary, but it is something that is advanced, of course, and it's persistent. That is the big piece there, persistence. There's been several talks about persistence. You probably heard these before, and what we call dwell time. And the dwell time is a big piece of that. And that's where the advantage of the adversary is, because they have the time, once they've infiltrated and infected and maintained command and control, they have time and they wait. And, it's usually, from when I was doing incident response, we were looking at probably 6 to 8 months average dwell time for an adversary. So we had to be really concerned with finding that threat before. And so the complexity is what we have to be concerned with. When we look at technological advancements outpacing regulations, the biggest one we have, when we look at it, is we have to be concerned with AI. That's the new thing. That's the new old thing. Cybersecurity, we've been using AI for years, or machine learning and advanced automatic detection and things like that. And AI is becoming very prominent in organizations. And oftentimes these organizations or enterprises are implementing AI without thinking of the consequences of it or doing it correctly, and then opening themselves up. AI captures all that data from a network, or the internet as the biggest network, and takes that and builds on that, and that AI is going to be able to gather all that knowledge, right? And if you have private confidential information within your network, you have to be concerned. And so the regulation piece of that is that we don't really have AI regulation. Most places do not, or if they do, it's not very comprehensive. Let's see, the advances in quantum computing, we have to be concerned with that. We're still waiting on something significant with that, but when that does occur, that will change the game for us, particularly with encryption. And then we have like covert channels. That's another popular thing that adversaries use, is to hide that malware, that communications within a secure connection, such as HTTPS, port 443. 443 is a very common port. It's very rarely blocked when going out from a network, because most of the things we do nowadays as a business are done online. Things like Salesforce, right? So when we look at that, we have to be concerned with how is that going out? What do we need to do for to detect that, right? There are a variety of technologies that can do that, but we should be working with other organizations to really kind of figure out what's going on, threat intelligence, things like that. Lack of communication between key stakeholders. So when we talk about this, key stakeholders are often going to be a variety of business units, and those business units each have their own focus, their own priorities. If we're talking about a larger scale ecosystem, such as vendors that work with each other or provide services like just HVAC, if you're familiar with HVAC. And HVAC has been a challenge because HVAC companies don't really focus on cybersecurity, right? And so by giving them access, they can get into a network and do what they need to do. But we all know that probably sometimes will go beyond what they need to do, and then we have an issue. And those stakeholders can be business units. One of the biggest things that I've seen is silos. We see silos within an organization, or we see silos within an entity such as a country or a state that should be concerned with the overarching security concerns, but we really look at that as we have this personal, or we have this edge. We're going to lose our edge if we give away our secrets. Unfortunately, that is really not the way we can do things anymore. I usually, for those of you that are familiar, I use this as it's a pretty horrible, horrific thing that happened in the U.S. back in September 11th, 2001. And most of you are probably familiar with that. But the key problem, one of the catalysts of this was the failure of these security organizations to share data amongst each other. They siloed. And when they do that, that means that you have a piece over here, like a puzzle piece over here, and a puzzle piece over here. You have got the whole picture. So that's the concern that we look at. And so things can be prevented or detected early if we do collaborate and if we don't live within silos. When we talk about limited resources for small organizations, with small companies and medium-sized companies they've increasingly become targets of cyber criminal organizations because of this factor, that they generally do not have the resources that a lot of larger organizations have at their disposal. They can't build teams within their organization because it is very, very expensive. We did computation in a previous company that I was at, and we figured out that a 24/7 security operations center running, if we had 7 people running, I think it was going to be $1 million per person after we computed all of the vacation and everything like that. So it's very expensive. That's the point. And a large expensive next gen firewall may not be within the organization's financial means. So we are looking at that too. And so there are ways that we can help with that. So the value of cross-disciplinary collaboration. When we look at the value, there's a lot of value, and it's not only money saving, but it's also builds trust. It builds this idea that I don't have to do this all myself, that there are other like-minded individuals or companies or governments is another one that are thinking the same as we are. So when we look at the value, we look at it in several different ways. We look at it from technology standpoint. When we look at frameworks, regulatory frameworks are a challenge. And we use frameworks such as ISO 27000 for most of us that are not within the US. And then we also have the NIST 800 series frameworks, which are really a solid series, and I usually teach from that. It has to evolve, and it has to evolve to address these concerns, these innovations, right? We want to have these innovations, but we also got to make sure that these innovations aren't going to increase our risk. So regulatory frameworks are a necessity. Most compliance requirements, whether it's PCI DSS, in the US it's like COBIT. When we talk about FISMA, there's several different frameworks that are available out there, and choosing one often depends on your industry or your need. So we need to be able to address them because things like AI, blockchain advancement, we got to look at that as an issue. Global security and data privacy is a big deal. That's another piece of that we have to look at. The more recent legislation that was passed in the European Union, the GDPR, is a good example of this. GDPR is a very strict set of policies that govern the privacy of EU citizens. By looking at what the requirements are, it can feel insurmountable by a lot of small to medium-sized businesses that have to deal with that particular privacy if we're doing business within the European Union. But it's a great regulation if you're a privacy person, because then you can say, I don't want my information on that server, take it off. So that's another thing we need to be concerned with, and we need to address that with policy. Sociology and cybersecurity, understanding user behavior, social engineering. When we look at the human element of any sophisticated organization, this sophisticated attack actually is often overlooked many times, that because what will happen is that your security team or your IT department or whoever is in charge of incident response will become fixated on the technology component. They'll be worried about what is this malware? How do we get rid of this malware? When we really should be taking a step back and look at how is our company culture? How are we training our individuals to be aware of these kind of threats? When we look at this, we want to impact everything from prevention to response. It's especially critical. We're talking about insider threats. There's a lot of numbers that throw around out there, but it's around 80% of organizations have reported at least one internal attack. So that's 80%, 80 to 85%. So that's a large chunk. Then we talk about economics, cost benefit analysis. Absolutely, we got to be concerned with that. When we look at what is the cost, what is the overall cost? Is it worth it? When I look at this, I often talk about an incident. When we do a risk assessment, depending on what our organizations, whether they're risk averse, if they're risk avoidance, all depends on the organizational policy. But when we look at that, is it more expensive to put prevention mechanisms in place, or is it more expensive that will the incident cost us more than putting, say, a firewall in? So we have to look at that. When we work with financial partners, we have to make sure that we are performing and internal departments performing a comprehensive risk assessment. And we need to really look at what the critical assets are. Because when we talk about economics, we determine these critical assets. It reduces the cost through earlier discovery and improved attack detection, right? So to reinforce where weaknesses are. We don't know what we have. We don't know what it costs. We don't know what the mean time to bounce back up. Then we can't really make a good, proper risk assessment. And the last one on this section here that we're talking about, value, education. All right. We need to build awareness through interdisciplinary training. So what that means is, from a security standpoint, when I worked as an information security officer, it was very important to understand what the business really was. What were we doing? What is our product? I mean, what are we generating revenue with? And then find these different departments, go to these departments and ask them, what is important to you? What is critical to you? I need to know this so that I can properly defend your assets that you're concerned about. Oftentimes, this is very helpful when we would use these departments as examples when we would do security awareness training, or when we would do discussions with C-level executives to get them on board and to understand what we're trying to accomplish. Because there are a lot of moving parts, and we all, when it's from a company standpoint or it's from a nation standpoint or global standpoint, there's tons of moving parts. So when we look at real world examples of cross-disciplinary collaboration, some of this really centers around public and private partnerships. We have an organization called CISA, and they work oftentimes with private organizations to better prepare the nation for cyber attacks. Another example is that in the US, we have the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the private sector work together, and we have an organization that, it's no secret, it's called InfraGard. And what that allows us to do is to share information between the federal government and private industry, because they learn from their mistakes, and they're learning from their mistakes. They haven't learned everything yet, but they're learning from their mistakes. And by working with private industry organizations, they can really hone in on what the threats are, where that critical infrastructure may be. When we talk about energy, power grids, there's a ton of different things that we have to be worried about. When we talk about academic collaborations, okay, industries to develop these mechanisms, the AI-driven defense mechanisms. AI is a huge thing, as we've already talked about, and we all know that. You can't go anywhere today and not hear something about AI. Research institutions, when we look at academic collaboration, it's very important that private industry and government agencies work with academic institutions that perform the research, because they're the ones that know the nuts and bolts of this AI-driven stuff. So when we talk about an industry partner that we want to build the next best malware detection, but we want to use AI for it, well, it's oftentimes in our best interest to go to the experts on the AI, and academic institutions often are those experts. And let's see. And then we also have international coalitions. So we have Interpol. There's a Global Encryption Coalition is another one, and there's some others out there that we know exist and we work together with internationally, because cybersecurity is not just a national problem, a nation's problem, or a state's problem. It's a global problem, right? Cybercrime is a global problem, and it's a very profitable global problem for many of the organizations participating in it. So nation states are what we have to really, when we have to get at that national level and the global level, then we have to be concerned more with nation states. All right, I think I'm doing well on time. So when we look at strategies, it's important to, as I've said before, it's important to understand from a business standpoint, it's important to understand what each business unit's priorities are, right? Accountants, business managers, sales managers, they all have a different focus. But when we look at it from a ecosystem standpoint, they all are working towards the same thing. So in order to truly understand a particular threat, for instance, targeted at a particular software, it may be a financial software. We need to talk with the financial department. We need to find out what's going on and what's the focus for them. We can use threat intelligence to do this also, but you need to collaborate. Encouraging communication through shared platforms. Sure, most organizations are using either Office 365, I think that's what they still call it, or Google Workspaces. Those are shared platforms, but there are other shared platforms out there that we in the cybersecurity industry are interested in. One of them that I always mention is the Open Threat Exchange. This is an open threat intelligence platform that anybody can contribute to and anybody can pull data from. And it also supports, the standards like the STIX platform and TAXI technologies so that you can consume that information into your existing technology. Standardized frameworks, I'm probably gonna get moving here. Standardized frameworks and protocols. We have to worry about, we wanna make sure that our frameworks are usable by anybody within that industry vertical. Protocols are also important. Then we also need to increase funding. The government generally should increase funding for collaboration on research projects, and we need to really focus on what is current and what is the biggest threat. Promote cybersecurity education across disciplines. It's not just for us here in this room, it's for everybody. Everybody should have a basic understanding of what cybersecurity is and what they can do to contribute to it. Okay. So, AI and machine learning. We've been using AI in a different, we didn't necessarily call it AI, but we've been using machine learning in cybersecurity for a long time, quite a while, often in cloud detection and response systems. Systems that I've worked with where malware would be uploaded to the system, and then we would use a variety of different automated detection methods to determine what kind of malware it is and what it intends to do. Should we detonate it within a contained environment to find out what the purpose of this malware is, so on and so forth. So that's just an example. There's opportunities to create open source solutions. Open source is a great place to start because open source is adopted by a lot of organizations now, or they incorporate it into their technology platforms. We look at cloud collaboration. I mentioned that about Office 365 and Google Workspace. And I also talked about OTX, or Open Threat Exchange. That's a very critical component too that we can use. It is a great platform, and it's really important because it provides that real-time coordination. Threat intelligence is important, and so that threat intelligence needs to be up to date. It needs to be current. We need to be able to go and pull that threat intelligence to help us prevent an incident from occurring. Cyber ranges are great, but we generally keep those within the technology folks, when we should be including people from other disciplines. We can create a training simulation that incorporates them and maybe we'll do a tabletop exercise, something like that, to kind of simulate what's going on. We often use simulated stuff. We often use, we'll do a phishing campaign internally to see who clicks on the link. Things like that. That is something that we can use as a metric to see where we are in the cybersecurity realm, right? So we talk about when these folks click on this link, that usually means that we should probably consider upping our ante on training. Maybe we need to focus more on that department if we have a high incident rate in that department. So we gotta have to work together to do that. You need to think outside the box because we need to explore that scenarios often overlooked. We look at industries too that we don't necessarily think about. Agricultural industry. In the U.S. we have big agriculture. Those companies are using a lot of technology now. We're looking at a lot of IoT technology too, and IoT is a whole nother ballgame. custodial department in a corporation. You know, we don't think about, you know, the custodial department as being something we have to worry about. But custodial department uses technology also. And if they're not trained as well as the rest of the organization, then we have, you know, we have a weak link. So tools and technologies is a very important thing. And so, as I said before, we need to be concerned with things like the threat intelligence and so on and so forth. It's very critical to make sure. And this measuring success, this is where it leads into this. So when we talk about the awareness of cybersecurity best practices, we cybersecurity professionals are very aware of cybersecurity best practices. But the problem is that most other professions or industries, verticals, are not aware of cybersecurity best practices. This is a significant issue, and it's very critical that when you put somebody, when you talk to an organization, and that organization, say for instance, let's talk about agriculture, not overly concerned about cybersecurity. But the problem we have there with the, let's say, agriculture is that that's where our food comes from. If there's a compromise and a big agriculture company goes and is offline and they can't do what they need to do to produce the food, then we have issues. And this is just as big of a deal as critical infrastructure like the power grid. So we need to make sure that we are increasing awareness, and I think that as a industry, as a field, we are doing a much better job now than we did even 5-10 years ago. We can collaborate to develop cohesive policies and regulations. When we look at policies and regulations, we as cybersecurity professionals, again, you know, we often don't discuss this with folks that are outside of our profession or outside of our department. But the problem is we need to talk about it and we need to discuss it, and we need to work with other departments if you're talking internally, or other organizations if you're talking externally, to develop policies that meet the needs that we are looking for. You know, these regulations come down from, you know, the government passes regulations, but by involving government and private industry in a collaborative effect or a collaborative unit, we can look at increasing the regulation effectiveness by giving them the information that they need. Lawmakers often don't have that information. They're not technology people. So we need to work with them on that. And that's been a problem with most nations nowadays too, is that we don't have enough awareness and knowledge at the higher levels to really produce these regulations. So it's important to have collaboration. When you adopt innovative cybersecurity technologies, very critical. We need to keep on the forefront of technology. AI is the one that we keep talking about, but AI is a big piece of this. A lot of software development organizations are looking at AI to write code. It's important that the folks that work with the code, the software developers that work with the code that AI has written, know what the code's supposed to do, know what the intention is, and be able to look at it and find any errors or you know, possible corruption within that code. But we also need to look at how do we explain this to the higher level folks. This is where that cybersecurity education comes in. And when we have that, we also see that we have a reduced incidence of cyber attacks and breaches. Once we have created a solid cybersecurity ecosystem, incidents will go down. You know, we will be able to see what cyber criminal organizations are doing, who they're doing it to, and figure out the best ways to prevent and or mitigate incidents. Okay. right? So wrapping this up, we are looking at, we've talked a lot about a lot of different things. And as I said before, this is a very high level view. And when we talk about cyber ecosystems, we need to understand that resilience cannot be effectively obtained by a single entity or organization. It requires collaboration and coordination by many different institutions. Institutions of higher learning like ECCU are ways to really effectively collaborate, working with other cybersecurity organizations, working with industry partners to understand what their needs are and what drives them and how they make their money. I always say everyone cannot be an expert on everything. So when somebody says, I'm an expert on this and this broad field of cybersecurity, that's really not necessarily possible, okay? But we can share that knowledge, and as an organization or as a collaboration, we can become experts that way. So we need to take advantage of institutional or tribal knowledge, often referred to in the tech industry, and expertise. We need to understand those different business units, understand what the critical technology is for them, maybe different than what we think. Cross-disciplinary collaboration bridges those gaps between those expertise and resources. We need to know what they need, and we need to bring our experts together to become experts, true experts. And then a resilient cyber ecosystem. By working together, we can absolutely create a more secure world. Even when there are competing interests, even when there are countries that have differing opinions, organizations that have differing opinions than each other, we can still collaborate to make this a more secure place. And the world needs it. We need collaboration. And hopefully you got something from this webinar. And like I said, high level, but it's definitely something to think about. All right. And I think that's wrapping it up. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Donald, for delivering such an informative session, and our attendees share the same sentiments. If you're interested to learn more about our program, do let us know in the poll that's going to be conducted now. If you would like to learn more, please select yes, and we will schedule a call to provide you with more information. An important note, admissions are presently open. For comprehensive details regarding our courses, kindly visit our official website, www.eccu.edu. So shall we start with the Q&A, Don?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay. So our first question to you is, how would you go about ensuring companies like Salesforce are not sharing your data?
That's a really good question. There should be safeguards put in place so that that you as an organization can ensure your data is secure and not sharing it. So by using a collaboration platform, that's really the key, is using a platform. You can control what information you provide to the other organizations or the other entities that and maintain that data privacy. It can be a tricky thing, but by using a commonly accessed platform, we have control over that data. Things like Open Threat Exchange, things like that, we don't really necessarily worry about that. There can be some private data in that information, and so it'd be necessary to definitely screen it. You can still collaborate, and you can still work together towards a common goal and secure your organization, because that really is the utmost importance, is to secure our organization. We want to help, we want to improve security in the world, but we want to secure our organization at the same time.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next question to you is, What is cyber ecosystem?
What is a cyber ecosystem? Cyber ecosystem is a conglomeration. It's a connected network of organizations, entities, individuals who have like-minded goals. Right? When we talk about a cybersecurity ecosystem, it often includes companies within what we call an industry vertical, so finance, healthcare, and cybersecurity. So those two need to work together, and that cybersecurity ecosystem allows them to collaborate. It allows the cybersecurity industry to understand what is important to that industry vertical. What do we need to protect? Who do we need to protect? And then they can work together to develop a common solution or a framework. But essentially, an ecosystem is just a group of things that work together, whether it's organisms or companies, and those companies all have a shared goal.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next question to you is, what are the metrics or standards to measure the level of resilience of an organization?
So that's a good question. So I think it depends. There are universal metrics that we can look at. Incident rates. We can look at a variety of data that we can pull from different systems that we may have, such as firewalls. Can we look at proxy servers and see what's going on and what's coming in? But there's also, different goals for each organization and different metrics for each organization. So, for instance, a cybersecurity organization within an ecosystem would say, well, let's look at how many incidents we potentially prevented, how many threat actors that we have discovered targeting this particular organization, several different things that we can look at in the cybersecurity field. But, other organizations such as a financial institution or a healthcare organization, they have their own metrics, and a lot of it centers around data. Is our data safe? Is the integrity of our data here? We need to make sure our data. So we talk about the CIA triad for all of you that are familiar with the CIA triad, all these students particularly. And so as long as we maintain that confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So those are really what we're looking at as a core goal. But we can look at from real number standpoints. If you're talking about real number standpoints, the cybersecurity company looks at the incidents or the potential incidents that they prevented, a variety of different things, how long it took to respond to an incident, how long was the system down. And then the organization itself, if it's non-technical organization such as a medical office, can look at, were we down at all? Did we have access to our patient records? Do we think that we might have lost some data? Do we think that we have an insider threat? Those are things that they can look at. But typically it's going to be around data. What data has gone out? Does it go out securely? Is it going to where it needs to go? Or do we have the chances of a data breach? Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next question to you is, how to mitigate the risk of cyber financial fraud and have proactive approach?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. How to mitigate the risk of cyber financial fraud and have proactive approach?
So cyber financial fraud. I think I'm not quite sure if I get what you're looking for, but if we're talking about things such as ransomware, we were talking about theft of financial information, such as credit cards, data breaches, then a proactive approach would be, of course, to try to prevent as much as possible. I think the biggest thing we look at is education. So I was ISO at a financial organization, and we had a lot of folks handling a lot of money, and we did audits. We had audits. I worked in the risk department. We did risk assessments frequently. look at new solutions and then do a complete risk assessment before we adopted it. But we have to look at education. It was very critical for us to make sure that individuals within our organization were familiar with best practices. If you have a doubt, don't click on it. Those kinds of things, just the simple things usually. And at the higher level, management, they had their processes for doing audits of the financial systems, or where was money going out, money coming in. So taking a proactive approach, I think a lot of it has to do with education and placing systems in having systems in place. So we use a lot of a term called data loss prevention, and then you're probably all familiar with that. And part of that is screening data information going in and out. So we know that there are covert channels. We know that that's one way that financial fraud occurs. Theft of financial information, whether it's as simple as credit card information or it's embezzlement. We can use something like data loss prevention as a proactive measure to prevent that from happening. But overall, I really lean towards that education piece when we talked about, where if we collaborate and we educate that industry or educate that department can also educate us as cybersecurity professionals to really understand what they're trying to do, and we can help them be proactive.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next question to you is, OT systems include sensors, monitors, actuators, generators, industrial robots, programmable logic controllers, remote processing units, and other technologies that are part of the industrial Internet of Things. So how would you protect the OT assets?
So OT systems, they have distinctly, there are similarities between IT systems and OT systems, but there are a lot of differences, obviously. OT systems, there are several best practices to protect operational technology. When we look at OT from say for instance, I use agriculture as a common industry. Agriculture uses a lot of OT. They use a lot of sensors. They may have these huge fields, and they need to monitor the weather and a variety of different things. Those systems should be, for one, on an isolated network, their own network. There are different ways. The problem with OT, as we probably understand, is that OT isn't built to be secure. IoT devices, OT, they're not built to be secure. They're built to do a job. Oftentimes, they're using an older technology, such as programmable logic controllers may use ladder programming, which is a common way to build that logic into that device and what it should be doing. But it's not designed for security. So what we have to do, we have to build security around it. We have to do defense in depth. And part of that is isolation of networks, monitoring, definitely monitoring. It's a different kind of traffic you'll see. If you ever have the opportunity to do a packet capture of OT, you can see that there's different things going on than we may see on a conventional IT network. But the biggest piece that we need to look at is isolation. And if we need to put up another firewall or another bastion host to access that's the way to do it. Sometimes when we look at things that are very critical, they may be air-gapped. They may not be connected to a conventional network. They're networked together, but they'll be off the corporate network. They won't have internet access. So they're going to require physical presence to be there. And in that situation, then we look at physical security, vetting of employees, and making sure that we are monitoring access logs, looking at what's going on, and protecting against that. But typically isolation is the number one thing that we've been doing around the industries that I'm aware of. So hopefully that answers your question, but it's definitely monitoring and isolation as the two big things.
Thank you for answering that question, Don. We'll take last two questions for the day. So our next question to you is, what are some practical applications of AI in cybersecurity?
So AI and cybersecurity, it's evolving as we speak. It is both a what I would say a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways. AI can be used in cybersecurity, automated detection. We can use AI to do predictive analysis of potential incidents. You know, we can use AI with our threat intelligence, and that AI can be designed to use that threat intelligence to help us build proactive measures to prevent incidents from occurring. But we used AI machine learning for many years in automated detection and response, particularly within cloud-based systems, web-managed security services such as web firewalls and detection systems like content detection systems. So AI can be used to enhance that. AI can also reduce the amount of time we spend on menial or basic tasks, because we do know that cybersecurity industry, the issue we have, one of the issues we have with not having enough people, is that those a lot of advanced practitioners are doing basic manual tasks during the day and don't have time to work on the bigger picture. So AI can take away some of that. You can automate some of that and help the junior level folks get up to speed and be able to take on more of the tasks that are at that level and let the advanced folks, the more advanced positions, to focus on the more critical components. Hopefully that's the answer you were looking for. I think that probably the biggest thing is automation and detection.
Sure. Thank you for answering that question. Our last question to you is, do you need experience or knowledge to create a secure ecosystem?
That's a good question. So a lot of it comes down to, as you're in the industry, you're an organization, if you know what you need or you have a good idea what you need to protect, you can start there. You can reach out to other organizations if you choose to do so. You can take on a cybersecurity company that may be able to help you with that, that side of things. You have your own folks internally, they may be able to assist with that. Yes, you can do a cyber ecosystem on your own within your company, because siloing and lack of collaboration happens internally also. So I would say yes to that question, with the caveat that you may need some additional assistance, contracted or whatever it may be.
Thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Professor Donald, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Now, before we conclude the webinar, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
Sorry, I missed that part.
I said, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
Oh, yeah, sure. So education is key. I think that those of you that are continuing your education or beginning your education in cybersecurity, that it's a great thing, and stick with it, because we need you. So definitely just stick to it, and you can accomplish anything.
Thank you so much for the message to our audience.